You mentioned, I know we get to the point in the sort of this spectrum of how thoughts and how thoughts specifically with emotions affect us in positive or negative ways or neutral. But as prescribed, I think we're adding to that conversation. Well, what happens when you toy with that and you bring in a chemical element that's supposed to help? And then we get into, well, what is and then you can actually create observable dysfunction, and that's where as prescribed comes in that. But the recovery, once you're off these medications, I believe really is, because I see people who do recover and I see people who do not recover. And we're complicated. Our genetics are different and all the different elements, our environments are different. So of course, hard and fast rules are ridiculous. But it is true. I've seen this over and over again. The people who recover embrace a new lifestyle, or if they had a healthy one, they are able to actually put it back into practice again. The trauma element of all this is very real, and it's part of, learning about handling, avoiding trauma, really, or having trauma that you can heal from more easily. Because with as prescribed, people can still think of it in terms of, well, this is the problem, as opposed to, well, now let's look at that problem and now what are we going to do with it, which is how I look at it. Because I did that for myself, because I'm a benzo survivor too.
Kathleen,
that's amazing.
Where I know you mentioned earlier about how you became involved in the film side of that, the making and things. But what effect did that have on you? Or have you already been sort of interested in that field anyway?
As prescribed in particular?
Yeah.
Well, I have most of my family members are healthcare providers or in the healthcare space in some way, whether it's on, in different aspects, including many folks in my family who are in the psychiatric side of things. And when I was telling some of them about this, they were like, oh, absolutely. We 100% agree with what Holly has, said and done in this film. And not enough people are talking about it or aware of it. And I had no idea that this was, I try to avoid being on medications as much as possible, just as a personal, health preference. But I didn't realize at all kind of the extent to which this had been happening in the background with medications that are so widely prescribed and so widely, used. So it was very eye-opening for me personally. And it just, again, it's just reinforces why it's so important for these stories to get out into the world. And I think what storytelling in film as a medium does, and why I work in it, is I think it's one of the only ways we can build empathy at scale for these experiences. Because outside of knowing someone who struggled with it personally themselves, that's in your personal, circles, you're not going to know what that reality is for people unless you see it depicted in a story like Holly's done. So, but I think it's incredibly powerful, and I think it sparks conversations and it opens people's eyes, and they do more research, and they, I think it's just such an important thing to get out there.
It kind of opens a door, doesn't it, that you hadn't thought of opening before. And then when you start opening that door and it gets wider and wider, you start seeing more and more things, so that hopefully there becomes a pathway in which that individual, if it's an individual, can see that there might be another way. They don't know for sure at that point. But I think that, a film like this, I've seen probably a couple of films that talked about, the issue of the prescriptive drugs, particularly around, fairly severe mental health stuff. I think the first one was probably more than 10 years ago that was fairly significant in that. But there wasn't enough momentum, I think, in the country as a whole in America at that point. But I'm suspecting now that that's beginning. where even like we know that that's beginning to happen in the UK. You know, the doctors now, and especially at a general practice level, you know, so these are in the communities and the towns, you know, where they are now realizing much of what they've ever prescribed was probably not the best option. So, you know, we're very much geared to how we tell that story, that part of the story, so that when that door gets slightly opened, there's something that can follow on that is at a pace suitable to them, whoever they are. Yeah. That's what we're trying to sort of steer towards from this end. And obviously that would be fantastic as well in terms of the States, you know, because, you know, the bigger problems that you have in the States, we're a much smaller country. We're growing at the same pace in the same direction. We tend to follow you guys apparently 6 to 8 years after, but
we were the source of the breakthrough tapering technique was from the UK in Newcastle upon Tyne, University of Newcastle, Professor Heather Ashton.
And I think I get the feeling now from you that part of your drive in your filmmaking and, you know, sort of digital storytelling is for more people to try and get their head around maybe how we've got into this position, whether you're USA or whether you're here in the UK. I mean, you know, I've been down this road a very long time, you know, 4 decades really. And it's only in the last 7 years where medically, I'm not a doctor, you know, so I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a health professional. But, you know, storytelling has been a large part of my life as long as I can ever remember. And the power and impact that can have. So, you know, I'm very excited, you know, that obviously we've made this contact to Neil and with yourself to look at expanding on from that storytelling that you're already doing. So I'm guessing that having done the one that I'm assuming that's fairly recently, which I think it is, you know, to see where that goes from there. What, you know, are you already looking at what you're going to do?
I started a nonprofit. This is one of the things I'm excited about, because when I realized how much help was needed and I had my own, I found some exciting methods to help myself get better. And I was very excited about sharing some of this information. And I started a nonprofit called Invisible Together. It's a lobbying nonprofit because we're involved in legislation in Massachusetts that's about informed consent, and it's specific to benzodiazepines. But I wanted, because I also had a terrible brain injury, a terrible concussion, terrible TBI, a post-concussion syndrome, very bad case of post-concussion syndrome, complicated by the benzodiazepine history. So my fascination went into the realm of the brain and the nervous system in general, not just benzodiazepines.
I love the name.
I just finished a survey and put in my for an organization in the United States, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM, and I over and over again in my responses sort of trying to prod them into expanding their idea of what they need to do to help people taper off benzodiazepines. You say you must address diet, you know, suggest healthier ways of sort of spending the day, find times to be in nature, you know, just these mindfulness, you know, just these things that you realize they're so basic and they've been there forever. And let's bring them back in. I'm glad there are movements to really, the timing is good because we're collecting and we're coming together and we're bringing in a shared passion for change.
Yeah.
And we share methods and getting away from the pill syndrome.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Graham, I saw you smiling then when I was smiling, and because of what Holly just said about brain injury, as well, because you've got a connection there. Well, we've all had a brain injury in a sense. Because obviously, I've had the operation, and Graham has also got post concussion syndrome.
It's not fun.
No, it isn't. And
It's funny.
It's so high, isn't it? People have no real idea. I mean, the most difficult one part of it for me is what's known as, well, here in the UK, cognitive function disorder. Other places, functional cognitive disorder. It's where I can literally only do one thing. Otherwise, I essentially kind of fall apart, really, where I can't think in any direction. And yet, like this, no one would ever know, would they? What goes on internally within people like ourselves, where you're trying not to, I mean, you know, I just got a glimpse then of the trees. I got nothing but trees here out through this window that way. And as I just glanced out there was a breeze, so they moved. But what I've learned to do right now is shut that off. Whereas before I could be part of that and still part of this, and it'd be really easy. But I know if I'd have gone more than that split second, I would have been starting to have problems as to where I'm at. You know, kind of, it's not easy, really.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy. We have to be so careful with each other because we can't see, and just trying to be sensitive of what helps one person, what's a threat, and just being gentle with each other.
Yeah.
A phrase I've shared with somebody online recently, and I use it a lot because I heard it said by somebody else, and I just love it. And that is, life looks after life. And
I'm going to go
just
with that.
Let it be. And if you see yourself as part of nature and you see yourself as that part of life, then of course that's what you've got to do. It's just allow things to flow, allow things to happen. You can always look at things with different eyes, and you can always see there's always that dualistic approach in this world that we live in.
Interestingly,
it's up to you which one. Sorry, I was going to say, it's just up to you which of those you think is the better one to be perceiving.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about the two like that, your two eyes, I mean, there's an old, very oldie world, actually Native American in origin, is around two-eyed seeing.
Yeah, I remember you telling me.
So two-eyed seeing is where we could have it as being the modern medicine taught straight out of med school, stroke, nothing else other than, you know, identify the illness, attach the prescription tick boxes to that illness, and the person is not even in the equation. So that's one sort of the way westernized medicine was going, and got very deeply down that rabbit hole, as against the other way of viewing, you know, which is pretty much completely the opposite, and more about the things that we're talking about. So
I'm very excited about the opportunity to share As Prescribed and its message, and hoping that other participants can see the connection, how though we care very much about spreading the word about benzodiazepine injury and what prescribed medications can do, but we care just as much about making sure healthier ways of living and using the information we've learned from these pretty devastating stories in great part, but you'll also see in the film that people do recover. And so when we take the point of recovery and we build on that in the real world, we have much to share. And one of the things that developed when I was making the film was an expanded interest in brain care and neurology. So I think this is something we all care about and share. So let's see how we can all connect on that. And thank you very much.